Ben, happy day after the All-Star game where nothing's happening.
Yeah, it's still. Does it still count as the only the only day that there's none of the main four sports or the four major sports are playing? That's still right, correct?
I think so. And maybe there's like some other day, like 2 days after Christmas, maybe nobody has a game or something. But yeah, pretty much. This is like one of those universal ones. I think the NFL, by the way, just as a quick side between you and me, is going to take advantage of that somehow. I don't know what they're going to put the day after the All-Star game, but they'll do something. They pretty much take in every other month where they look ahead event. It feels like inevitable to me that they'll do something. But rookies report tomorrow. Kind of give me the logistics here of this first week as we lead up to the real training camp.
Yeah, no, I mean everybody got a bit of a break and now start to return to Ashburn. At least those that went away. The rookies get in first, but yeah, by next week everybody will be there, and I'm really looking forward to this training camp. There's obviously the obvious reasons. Jayden Daniels. There's just so much new happening across the board, but I also think, I don't know how much we got out of the OTA and minicamp period in terms of like really assessing where this group is at. There was so much mixing and matching of rotations. They admittedly are trying different people at different spots to get a feel for the roster. And now we should start to see more definition. Who's lining up in the first team and the second teams, who's playing where, not to mention, pads will be coming on. So at points. So, I think every year with training camp is interesting for the upcoming season, but I think with so much different, so much new, I think this one's going to be really fascinating.
So what are the biggest questions? Obviously, Jayden Daniels, that's questions 1 through 1,000, right? About, how good he is and how much they can put on his plate in year one, week one, the whole 9 yards. But in terms of the rest of the roster, what are the questions that are going to be answered here over the next few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think one, obviously the offensive line, there are still some questions there on the left side. Is it Cornelius Lucas? Is Brandon Coleman showing enough as a rookie to really contend for that starting left tackle spot? I think we're all assuming at guard that Nick Allegretti is going to get that job, and that's probably the case. But is there a world where somebody else pushes him? Chris Paul was obviously a starter there a bunch last year. I don't think so, but let's just see what that left side of the line looks like for sure. And then I think maybe we get a better feel now. The lines in general, I think, are just questions like how does the edge rusher rotation work after Dorrance Armstrong? It feels like it's kind of up in the air a bit. I want to see Austin Eckler out there more. I mean, the running game is not really a focal point of the early part of the offseason program, but gets a little more involved now. And, I think if this team's going to make a jump this year, I think having a guy like Austin Eckler return to his previous form is going to be a big reason why. Well, let's see that. I want to see what he looks like out there as best we can with the running game in these camps. So and then you go to the secondary, youth all over the place. Obviously, it was a messy group last year. Now you have new coaching staff. You have new pieces in like Mike Sandersill and Jeremy Chin. I think I have a sense of how that group might look, but with so many new pieces and so much youth, I'm curious to see what ultimately happens there with that about.
Ben Standig of The Athletic with us here on G&D. No GP, just me, Danny Huhay, kicking it with you until 6:30 tonight. Johnny Newton, what's his role going to be as the year evolves? How concerned are we about 2-foot surgeries? Just kind of give me a state of the union on him and how you think it's going to go for him this year.
Yeah, I mean, having two surgeries like that before you even start playing is definitely somewhat concerning. I mean, I mean, it has to be. I've heard nothing but raves though in terms of the player and what Washington is getting from him. I think for this year, if he's good to go, I would think he's the third tackle behind John Allen and Jerron Payne. And what's so interesting, and maybe it's even to the point when you consider the uncertainty at defensive end, there could be a world where all three of those guys are playing together. I don't think that's crazy at all. I think the interesting part is, of course, how much can Newton show them? And if he shows them a lot, what does this mean for John Allen's future knowing he's, if not this year, then certainly next offseason, he's going to, start having talks with the team about contract negotiations with his deal coming. He's got 2 years left. There's no more guaranteed money on the deal. So I think Newton's a really fascinating piece. It's one of those moves where I understand why they made it for the long term, and everything here is about the long term, but he could have an impact sooner than later if he's able to get back on the field. Now, I don't know if he's going to get on the field much in training camp at all, so maybe that slows things up. But when he's ready to go, I'm really fascinated to see how he works with Allen and Payne and the rest.
And that's what I want to get to. So let's assume health, which I'm not, by the way. I'm as you know, I'm a nervous Nelly in general when I hear foot surgeries, and I just have, is he Johnny Doxson? Are we doing this again? But let's say he's healthy and ready to go. How do you see him being deployed? Because you mentioned the 2 defensive tackles, you got a couple Pro Bowl guys. There's going to be some opportunities for a 5-man front here and there, but I don't know if you major in that. How do you see his snap counts, usage? How's he going to be used this year if healthy?
Yeah, in the past when, they were using some 5-man lines, they would have a guy like Matt Ioannidis come in as a third tackle, to work with Allen and Payne. I think what's interesting this year is, sure, that's a possibility. But I also think, with Frankie Louvu and the way they're going to deploy him here, there, and everywhere, he could easily be their sort of wide 9 pass rusher, which means, you could have him outside of whoever's playing the left defensive tackle and still have, so you could essentially have 5 defensive linemen with Louvu, but still a linebacker, and having the 3 tackles play, and it'd be a way to give you maximum protection against the run while still having guys inside who we've seen be able to get after the quarterback. So I don't think it's inconceivable. Like I never really loved the 5-man look in the previous group because I didn't, Montez Sweat and Chase Young dropping into coverage, that wasn't what they did. But Frankie Louvu has that versatility. So I think it's conceivable that all 3 tackles could play together. But if not, then, look, Allen and Payne are going to play a lot. But, this is a way to keep them fresh, having him, not to mention Ridgeway and Fedarian Mathis behind them. So, I think Newton, it won't stun me if he's out there with Allen and Payne. But, again, we've got to see him get on the field. Like you said, there has to be some level of concern having 2 surgeries already.
Same question, but for Sanders still. Is he sort of cornerback 1? Is he slot guy from day one? I mean, where do you see him lining up and how they're going to use him?
Yeah, I think the slot is the plan. I mean, there is a belief that he can play outside when needed. And if he were to, really establish himself this summer, then, maybe when they are starting off in just sort of a base set, that maybe he is one of the other, he's one of the 2 cornerbacks on the field. But I think for now, I would look for him in the slot while they try to work through, St. Juste and Forbes and Mike Davis and figure out what exactly they have there. I'll say this. I'm really intrigued with Sanderson in particular to see what else they choose to do with him. They're not going to show us a lot of secrets in camp, of course, but, this is a guy who was a receiver when he first started in college. And supposedly he had, when teams were at Michigan's Pro Day to watch J.J. McCarthy, Sanders still was like their best receiver. I had multiple people tell me. He's also been in the punt returner mix. Not that he was he was not a returner really in college, but he's got these kinds of skills. So it'll be interesting to me to see, do they look to use him in multiple ways? And if so, is that how they maybe sort of overuse him rather than say, go play outside at corner when they have some other options? So I think that's going to be really interesting to see if they use him beyond just playing in the slot.
Ben Standig with us here on G&D. So let me give you my quick opinion and I want your reaction. I am not a huge believer in sort of Zach Ertz renaissance. I like that he's here. Didn't cost him a whole lot. That's sort of a helper to implement Kingsbury's offense, but I don't see him being a 50 catch guy for this team anymore. A, I want to see if you disagree with me. Tell me I'm wrong. I'd love to hear why. B, I think that opens up a chance for Ben Sinnott to do some things. I think he could be, I'm not saying he's Chris Cooley, but Cooley light, right? That little bit of fullback, a little bit of H-back, a little bit of tight end, rookie quarterback, kind of his best friend. I could see a decent impact from Sinnott, mostly because of opportunity, because I don't think Ertz is really going to stand in his way. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on Ertz in general. I mean, I will say I thought Ertz ran better than I was assuming during the OTA and minicamp period. And look, it's not that he's been an ineffective player when available. It's just has not been, as available, and clearly he's slowed down a bit. But I'm with you. I think he's here mostly to help, integrate everybody with Kingsbury's system. What's interesting about Synod is, clearly they went with the best player available in the draft, but Synod almost feels like the one spot where they said, okay, we want this very specific type of player. He was the only tight end prospect that I was told by others that if you wanted a guy who could play some H-back, could line up really kind of everywhere in the formation, it was get him or there was nobody else. And the fact that Adam Peters mentioned that he sees some George Kittle, but also Kyle Juszczyk in Synod when they drafted him says something, because, Juszczyk is basically a fullback. And while he's gotten a lot of attention, he and his wife out in San Francisco, because they're on a good team, you're not typically drafting that type of player anywhere close to day two. So it really feels like they like his skill set a lot and the versatility. So, yeah, you're right. I don't think it would stun me at all if he ends up being the best tight end this year. I'm just always cautious with the rookie, with rookies adjusting, but he looked pretty good to me in camp. And yeah, I think it won't stun me if he's getting a lot of work with the ones this summer, but at the same time, Zach Ertz is here for a reason.
Give me another one of these rookies we haven't talked about. They have a pretty big draft class. Jordan McGee, Dominic Hampton, trying to think of something like Brandon Coleman, we haven't talked about really, or some of these other guys maybe at the back end, or Luke McCaffrey for that matter, who you think actually has more of an impact than maybe idiots like me are thinking.
Well, I think Jordan McGee is pretty fascinating. I remember right after the draft and checking with people around the league, like, what you think of the draft. And, you're assuming they're going to discuss Jayden Daniels primarily. But I had more than one person say he thought their best sort of pound-for-pound pick, at least outside of Daniels, was Jordan McGee, that he was a really underrated prospect, tremendous athlete. He may be their future Mike linebacker. And I think if you look at it right now, I think one debate is Jamin Davis going to be on this roster come week one? Sure, it would be easy to say yes, but, if he's going to be a backup, he's not been a special teams guy historically. So, is he really the third guy? If not, I think McGee might be that player, and that would mean getting him on the field, here and there. Obviously, they're rarely, I would think, going to use three linebackers at the same time, but I also don't know what they're going to do with Bobby Wagner definitively on passing downs. He's still a great player, but has slowed down a bit in that regard. So I think McGee potentially has a role in this group, and if nothing else, he's really going to be a fun watch going forward.
All right, let's get to Daniels. This is obviously, points alpha through omega as to, what's critical and important this year, not just for this year, but for everybody's key card to work in a handful of years, right? Like if they're right and he's good, everything looks a lot better. It's all rosy. It's the greatest cologne in the world. What do you think it's going to look like week one? This offense, Daniels, fit, design. Obviously, saw on one end, Eric Bieniemy never run it. You've seen on the other side, read option out of the Yang, maybe back in 2012. How's this offense going to look in week one? And then maybe contrast that to how it's going to look maybe a year or two from now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, with Cliff Kingsbury, you expect a sort of this high octane 3 and 4 receiver looks at all times. And, I think we will get some of that. But I think it won't surprise me if they're a little bit more conservative with their looks and play calling initially, in that, going with some 2 tight ends to help with the blocking and to help give the rookie quarterback, another passing option close to the line, as well as just more protection. Signing Austin Eckler when you already have Brian Robinson, sure, they needed somebody to replace Antonio Gibson in that pass catching role, but Austin Eckler is not just, another sort of rando change of pace guy. He's obviously been one of the better running backs in the league. So I think, to me, that's a sign that they're going to lean into the running game a fair amount as well. But yeah, I think with Daniels, getting him out of the pocket is going to be huge. I think one key is, we all saw him take these cartoonish hits in college, and you've got to avoid that significantly. And I think, obviously he's not going to get hit in camp, but what their feel is for that aspect of it all, I think will probably dictate to some degree how open Kingsbury wants this offense to be. I also think the other question I have is, like, who is the third receiver, right? I mean, we're going to say it's McLaurin and Dotson at the top. Dotson didn't have the best of years last year. And so, okay, so there's that. But then who's the third guy? And I think until a third guy emerges, they may be better off going with more of Eckler with two tight ends, et cetera, because from just a pure talent standpoint, and also I think a way to help this kid. So I think eventually it's going to be, they'll open up the book across the board for Daniels and get him, in space. He's also obviously a really good passer in the pocket. So there's so much they can do. But in my head, I just imagine, slow at the beginning, in part because of their roster and in part to help him adjust, especially with questions on the offensive line.
So for Dotson, I think I'm not pretty bearish on his year this year. And I don't know if you've heard much, but I've advocated for them to go get another playmaker. They seem pretty content with what they've got. For Dotson, I wonder if it's maybe last year was an ill fit for the people that are advocating for him this year. Like, in other words, he just lined up on the outside a lot because you had Curtis Samuel doing the slot gimmick type stuff. Do you see maybe Dotson getting some slot work to try to kind of get him going a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think one of the intriguing things on both sides of the ball is seeing how the coaches are going to deploy the players and not just have them be in some sort of static role. You line up here and you line up there, and that's pretty much how it's going to be at all times, whether it's the receivers or the pass rushers. I think we're going to see a lot more changes with where players are at. And in terms of Dotson, we saw some work in OTAs where he was in the slot with McCaffrey, who's the bigger receiver outside. I think McCaffrey coming into the league, a lot of people assumed that he would be the slot receiver because that's kind of where he performed best in college. He's got some good skill sets for that, but he's got versatility to play outside. So yeah, I think Dotson will be inside and outside, be more of a mix this year than it was. And we all remember when he arrived, it was the height of oh crap, what's the term I'm looking for here, Danny? The vertical catching,
I don't know what you're going at. What are you going for?
With the fact that Dotson's ability to catch the ball
in traffic, contested catches.
Because Carson Wentz, they wanted to have guys who had the ability to sort of go up and catch passes, and I think Dotson showed he could do that as a rookie. The 7 touchdowns, a lot of it were that, but I don't think Eric Bieniemy saw him that way, so they didn't deploy him nearly as much in the red zone for these opportunities. Oh, catch radius, that's what I'm thinking.
Oh, there you go. I knew that.
Yeah, so Dotson, I mean, that was he was one of the the main pieces to help that. And I think I don't know for sure, but I would like to imagine they get him more involved in that regard. He's obviously not a big guy, but he can play bigger in traffic, and did not use him as much in that space. And I would like to think that they would try to do that more this year.
All right. So final question here. How is this coaching staff? I mean, it's so early. We don't know what we don't know just yet. But one of the underrated things I think, and this is from an angle of positivity in general, is I've been pretty impressed with the assembling of this coaching staff, right? Guys have had bigger roles elsewhere, now kind of moved to lesser roles. You've got the up-and-comers, the Daryl Tapps of the world. I like the mix. How on the same page do we feel like this coaching staff is going to be? Especially if there are struggles at times, right? Because I could see a lot of guys trying to use their position to try to get the hell out of here. Thinking of Brian Johnson, for example, who at one point was probably a hot OC candidate, and now, is third or fourth in line, depending on who you ask in terms of hierarchy. How cohesive do we feel like the staff is and is going to be?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question, and it's a legitimate worry when you have, whether you're talking about a roster of players or a coaching staff, having a star group does not always work out well because everybody kind of wants their opportunity. And like you said, that could lead to some lack of cohesion. On the other hand, this is what makes Dan Quinn, such a unique hire, is that, whatever his best strengths seem to be, that he is a connector of people, that he is able to bring a group together and have them get on the same page. And that seems to be the case so far, and I think that's the hope, because you have former head coaches on this staff and former coordinators who now have different roles. So there can be some egos getting in the way, but I think, with Quinn in particular, I think there's really going to be, some of that cohesion that you were talking about. Obviously, there's a lot of people on here on the staff from Dallas, but different groups as well. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. They have almost like say it's kind of the same thing with the front office. They just hired another former GM and Scott Fitterer the other day. So and that's another group where they just added a lot of different pieces. So how it all works, we'll have to see. But I do think in the coaching staff, I think having Dan Quinn, this is why his presence, I think, is going to go a long way initially towards the players and the staff getting on the same page.
Ben, probably feels like you didn't get a break at all, but you start again tomorrow, dude. Right back at it. Appreciate the time today.
Thanks for the stark reminder, Danny. I appreciate it.
There you go. That's lovely. There he goes, Ben.